Did you know that verbs are absolutely essential in a sentence? To make a sentence, most of the time you must have a verb. These are words that usually describe what the noun is doing, feeling, or being. Hi everyone, this is Winnie or Miss Tang. Today we are learning to identify sentences with verbs and verb groups. This is because we want to achieve precision and add detail by describing the action or the situation. Our success criteria today includes good is I can identify different types of verbs. Great. I can identify sentences with different types of verbs. I can identify sentences with verb groups. Amazing is can you identify sentences with verb groups that indicate the tense? So your future, past, or present tense. And fabulous is can you write sentences with these verbs and verb groups in your writing so that you can provide more information to your reader. Here are some examples of different types of verbs. So firstly, you've got your action verbs. This is to describe a physical activity or an action. You have your thinking verbs, which describe what the character is thinking. You have your feeling verbs, which describe how your character feels. There are also saying verbs, which describe how your character spoke. And you also have relating verbs, which describe how the character relates to other parts of the story. This is an example from a narrative that I have written called Amber and the Browbeating Bully. And this is actually a prequel to the book that my friend and I are writing. Here are some examples of different types of verbs. You've got your action verbs. Viviana flicked her brown ponytail with one hand and stalked past Amber. We're showing how or what she's doing with her ponytail and how she walks past Amber. She doesn't just walk, she stalks past her. Amber shook her head. So we've got flicked, stalked, and shook as our action verbs. For our thinking verbs, we have she remembered Viviana's harsh words. So remembering, that's how she's thinking. She's remembering back into the past. Another example is I think you'd make a good role model, praised Mrs. Robinson. Just consider it. So you've got remembered, think, and consider as your thinking verbs because it shows us what the character or how the character is thinking. And then I've put praised, and praised is how Mrs. Robinson is saying those words. Saying verbs. So that leads us to our saying verbs. The best one yet, declared Viviana. So that's how she's saying it. She's not just saying it, she's declaring it to everyone. You're very kind, beamed Mrs. Robinson. So you'd better choose wisely, chuckled Rufus. So you've got your saying verbs as declared, beamed, and chuckled. And it's always a good idea to describe how they are saying it instead of writing said Viviana, said Mrs. Robinson, said Rufus, because we can do that, but we want to describe and help our readers visualize how they are saying it and keep them engaged. Our feeling verbs. She really wished she knew how to stand up to someone like Viviana. I hope you choose better next time. So we have wished and hope as examples of feeling verbs. Relating verbs. Mrs. Robinson was their cheerleading coach and Amber's Year 5 teacher. Amber had a round face, curly hair, and emerald green eyes. Was and had are our relating verbs or our examples because it tells us how they relate to the different parts of the story or the character. So Mrs. Robinson was, we're telling the audience that she's the cheerleading coach and Amber's Year 5 teacher. And we're also telling the audience that Amber had a round face, red curly hair, and emerald green eyes. Now let's have a look at verb groups. These are a group of words or a combination of verbs. It usually includes a main verb with some other verbs around it. Verb groups or verbs also show us what tense they are in, so whether it is the past, present, or future tense. If it's happening in the past, future, or presently. And they're used to communicate what is happening in an action or an event. And the reason why authors use verb groups is to engage our reader and to also help the reader visualize what is happening in the story. Verb groups can include a main verb. It can also include auxiliary verbs and or modal verbs. Auxiliary verbs are used to communicate the tense, mood, and voice. For example, some of these verbs used are be, was, were, is, am, going, to, do, has, have, did. Modal verbs are a type of auxiliary verbs that express an attitude or an opinion. An example of these verbs include can, could, will, would, shall, should, might, must, and etc. Here are some examples of verb groups. Viviana was standing in front of her. So we've got our was, and then standing is our main verb. Rufus had been working a lot on his business. Working is our main verb, and then we also have the other verbs had been. Amber tried to run to her final position of the cheerleading dance. Run is our main verb, and then we have tried to. Here are some examples of sentences with verb groups with modal verbs. I will be nominating myself. We've got will be as our modal verbs and nominating as our main verb in the sentence. Your words can lift someone up. Can as our modal verb and then lift as our main verb. And also now they could speak up. So could is an example of our modal verb. Verbs and verb groups can also indicate tense. It tells the reader when something is happening, whether it's in the past, present, or the future. It tells the audience when this action is taking place. Here are some examples of past, present, and future tense. We've got Amber shook her head. Amber shakes her head. So shook is in the past tense. It happened in the past, and shakes is if she were doing that in the present time. So if she was doing that right now. Amber shakes her head. And then for the sentence, I will be nominating myself, will be is talking about in the future. So in the future, she's thinking of nominating herself. Okay, now it is your turn. Can you find any verbs or verb groups in the book that you are reading? Can you figure out whether it's in the past, present, or future tense? Because sometimes it switches around. And can you write your own sentences with verbs or verb groups? Here is my grammar and punctuation playlist right here. See you in my next video. Bye!